My hands are useless. That's what my son said right there in the middle of a crowded clinic waiting room. I was just trying to hold a glass of water. But my fingers trembled. The glass slipped and it shattered on the floor. Silence followed, then his voice sharp and cold. You can't even hold a glass, Mom. I felt something inside me break, something deeper than pride. And then a man stepped forward, a surgeon, judging by his coat. He stared at my shaking hands like he'd seen them before, and what he said next changed everything. Those hands. And then a man stepped forward, a surgeon, judging by his coat. He stared at my shaking hands like he'd seen them before, and what he said next changed everything. Those hands saved my life. I froze because I didn't recognize him, but somehow he remembered me. If this moment made you feel something, take a second to like this video. And if you've ever felt underestimated, especially by someone you love, subscribe and stay with me. I'd really love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And tell me honestly, have you ever been made to feel like you no longer mattered? After my husband passed away 5 years ago, I moved into my son Ethan's house. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do. He insisted on it, actually. Said he didn't want me living alone at my age. Back then, his voice still had warmth in it. Concern. Something that sounded like love. But things change slowly, quietly. Almost without you noticing, until one day you do. Ethan lived in a large, modern home in a suburb just outside of Seattle. Glass walls, open kitchen, everything clean and minimal. It never quite felt like a place where someone like me belonged. I had come from a small, cozy home filled with photo frames, worn furniture, and the smell of coffee that lingered long after morning. Here, everything felt temporary. Replaceable, including me. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, was always polite. She never raised her voice, never said anything cruel outright. But there was a distance in her smile, a carefulness. Like she didn't quite know what to do with me, or maybe didn't want to. Do you need help, Keith? She would ask, her voice soft, but her eyes already drifting away. I always said no, even when I did. Especially then. My room was on the first floor near the laundry room. Ethan had said it would be more convenient so I wouldn't have to climb stairs. At first, I appreciated the thought. Later, I realized it also meant I was out of sight, out of the way. I spent most of my days there, reading, watching television, sometimes just sitting quietly listening to the faint sounds of life happening upstairs. Footsteps, laughter, the clink of dishes. A life I was technically part of, but not really included in. And then there were my hands. They had started trembling about a year ago. Just slightly at first. I thought it was fatigue, maybe nerves. But over time, the shaking grew more noticeable, more persistent. A neurologist eventually confirmed what I had begun to fear. Parkinson's. Early stage, he said. Manageable. But he didn't live in this house. He didn't see the way Ethan's jaw tightened the first time I spilled coffee on the kitchen counter. Or the second. Or the 10th. You have to be more careful, Mom, Ethan would say, grabbing a towel, wiping quickly like he needed to erase the evidence. I'm trying. I'd reply, my voice smaller each time. And I was. God, I was trying. But my hands didn't listen anymore. One evening we were having dinner together. One of those rare nights when Ethan wasn't working late. Rachel had made grilled chicken and salad. Everything looked perfect, arranged like something out of a magazine. I remember feeling nervous sitting there. Not because of the food, because of the silence. I reached for my fork, and my fingers trembled. Just enough. The fork slipped. It clattered against the plate louder than it should have. Both Ethan and Rachel looked up instantly. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, reaching for it again. But my hand shook more now, worse, under their gaze. Ethan exhaled sharply. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout, but it cut deeper than either. "Mom!" That tone, that tired, worn-out tone. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just slipped." Rachel offered a small, tight smile, then went back to her food. But Ethan didn't. He leaned back slightly, watching me like I was something fragile or broken. "You know," he said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. "Maybe you should let us handle things more. It's just easier." Easier. That word stayed with me long after dinner ended. Easier for who I used to have steady hands. Strong hands. Hands that worked 12-hour shifts without a break. Hands that comforted patients, changed bandages, held onto people when they were scared and alone. Hands that mattered, but no one in this house knew that version of me. Not even Ethan. I don't think I ever told him. Or maybe I did once a long time ago when he was too young to understand, or too busy growing up to remember. To him, I was just Mom. And now just an aging woman who couldn't even hold a fork properly. Days blurred together after that. Little moments kept piling up. A glass slipping from my fingers. A button I couldn't fasten. A cup I held too tightly, or not tightly enough. Each mistake felt like proof that I was becoming exactly what Ethan feared. A burden. One afternoon, I tried to help Rachel fold laundry. It seemed simple enough, something I could still do. I picked up a shirt, carefully smoothing it out, but my hands shook again. The fabric twisted awkwardly. "I can do that," Rachel said quickly, stepping in, her tone still polite but firmer now. "It's okay," I said. "It's fine, Keith," she repeated, taking the shirt from me. Not asking. Taking. I stepped back, smiled, nodded, and walked away. I didn't cry. Not then. But later in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands for a long time. They rested in my lap, trembling faintly. I turned them over slowly, studying them like they belonged to someone else. Wrinkled skin, veins more visible than before, fingers that no longer obeyed. "Useless," I whispered. The word felt heavy on my tongue. I hated it. And yet I couldn't argue with it anymore. Not when every day seemed to prove it true. What hurt the most wasn't the shaking. It wasn't even the frustration. It was the way Ethan looked at me now. Not with anger. Not exactly. But with disappointment. Like I had somehow failed him. Like I had become less than what he needed. Less than what he deserved. And maybe in his eyes, I had. I started avoiding the kitchen after that. Avoiding shared meals when I could. Eating earlier or later, or sometimes not at all. It was easier that way. Less chance of dropping something. Less chance of being seen. Because being seen meant being judged. And I wasn't sure how much more of that I could take. But life has a way of forcing you into moments you can't avoid. Moments that expose everything you've been trying to hide. The day at the clinic, the glass slipping from my hands. Ethan's voice harp and final. Your hands are useless. Moments that expose everything you've been trying to hide. The day at the clinic, the glass slipping from my hands. Ethan's voice sharp and final. Your hands are useless. That wasn't just frustration. That was truth. At least the truth he believed. And for a moment, standing there surrounded by strangers, I believed it too. Until someone else spoke. Someone who saw something different. Something I had almost forgotten myself. That night stayed with me longer than I ever expected. Even now, standing decades later in that bright, sterile clinic, With my hands trembling, I could still feel the cold air of that hospital hallway in Chicago. I could still hear the echo of hurried footsteps, the distant hum of machines, and the rain, always the rain, pounding relentlessly against the windows. Back then, I was 31 years old, full of energy, full of purpose. I worked the night shift at St. Matthew's Community Hospital, a small facility tucked between two aging apartment blocks on the south side of the city. It wasn't the kind of hospital you saw on television. We didn't have cutting-edge equipment or endless staff. Most nights, we were barely holding things together. But we cared. At least I did. Night shifts were always unpredictable. Some nights were quiet, just the occasional patient with a fever or a minor injury. Other nights, everything happened at once. That night was the latter. It was just past midnight when the doors to the emergency room burst open. I remember flinching at the sound. Two men rushed in, drenched from the rain, carrying a small boy between them. The child's body was limp, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Help him!" One of the men shouted, his voice raw with urgency. We moved immediately. I grabbed a gurney, pulling it into position as they laid the boy down. His skin was pale, too pale, and there was blood. Not a lot, but enough to make my stomach tighten. "What happened?" I asked, already checking his pulse. "No response. Car accident," the other man said, quickly avoiding my eyes. "We found him like this. Found him." Something about the way he said it felt wrong, but there wasn't time to question it. The boy's pulse was weak, faint, barely there. "Where's Dr. Harris?" I called out to the front desk. "He stepped out." The receptionist replied, her voice shaky. "He said he'd be back in 30 minutes. 30 minutes? My heart dropped. We didn't have 30 minutes. I looked down at the boy again. His chest rose unevenly, shallow breaths fighting to stay alive. There was a deep gash along his side, and something about the angle, it wasn't just superficial. Internal bleeding. I had seen it before, and I knew exactly how fast it could take someone. "Get me the trauma kit," I said, my voice sharper now. One of the nurses hesitated. "Keith, we're not supposed to." "I know. I cut her off. Just get it." Because we weren't supposed to do this. Not without a doctor present. Not without authorization. But rules don't matter when someone is dying in front of you. The two men who brought him in stood near the doorway, whispering to each other. I glanced at them briefly. They weren't worried in the way people usually are. They were tense, like they were afraid of something else entirely. "Sir," I said, looking at them. "What's his name?" Silence. They exchanged a glance. "We don't know," one of them said finally. I didn't believe that, but again, there wasn't time. The boy groaned faintly, his body twitching. I leaned closer, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Hey," I whispered. "Stay with me, okay? You're going to be all right." His eyelids fluttered just for a second, and in that brief moment, I saw fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. Something inside me locked into place right then. I wasn't going to let him die, not like this, not alone. The trauma kit arrived, and I took a steadying breath. My hands were calm back then. Steady, reliable. I cleaned the wound quickly, assessing the damage. It was worse than I thought. The damage. It was worse than I thought. The bleeding wasn't stopping. We needed to control it. "Now." "Clamp," I said. The nurse handed it to me, her hands shaking more than mine. "You can't do is alone," she whispered. I'm not alone. The bleeding wasn't stopping. We needed to control it. Now. Clamp, I said. The nurse handed it to me, her hands shaking more than mine. You can't do this alone, she whispered. I'm not alone, I replied quietly. Because I wasn't. I had my training, my instincts, and a life in front of me that needed saving. I worked carefully, focusing on each movement. Every decision mattered. Every second counted. The room felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. The boy's breathing grew weaker. Come on, I murmured under my breath. Stay with me. I could feel the weight of what I was doing pressing down on me. If I made a mistake, if I went too far, I could lose my license, my career, everything I had worked for. But if I did nothing, he would die, and I would have to live with that. I chose, and once I did, there was no turning back. Pressure, I said, adjusting my grip. The bleeding slowed, just slightly. Hope flickered. Vitals, I asked. Still low, the nurse replied. But stabilizing a little. A little. It was enough. I kept going. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 15. 15 minutes between life and death. 15 minutes where everything I had ever learned came down to this single moment. And then the boy's breathing changed. It wasn't much, but it was stronger, more regular. I froze for a second, hardly daring to believe it. Check again, I said. The nurse leaned in, watching the monitor. Her eyes widened. He's stabilizing. A wave of relief hit me so suddenly, I almost lost my balance. I stepped back slightly, my hands still hovering over him. Alive. He was alive. The door swung open again just then, and Dr. Harris rushed in his coat, half-buttoned, his expression confused. What the hell is going on? He demanded. I looked at him, my heart still pounding. I had to act, I said simply. He stared at the boy, then at the equipment, then back at me. For a moment, I thought he was going to yell, or worse, but instead, he moved quickly to take over, checking everything I had done. Silence filled the room as he worked. Then after a few seconds, he glanced up at me and nodded, just once. You kept him alive, he said. That was all. But it was everything. The two men were gone by then, vanished without a word. No names, no paperwork, no explanation. Just gone. And the boy, he was taken into surgery shortly after. I never saw him again. No one ever told me what happened after that night. No follow-up, no thank you, just silence. But I remembered him. I always remembered him. Because that night I crossed a line. And even though I saved his life, I knew deep down there would be consequences. I should have felt proud that night. That's what people always imagine when they hear a story like mine. Some quiet heroism, a moment of courage rewarded with gratitude and respect. But that's not how it felt. Not even close. Because the moment the adrenaline faded, fear took its place. Dr. Harris didn't say much after that single nod. He took over the case completely, his movements quick and precise as he prepared the boy for surgery. I stepped back, my hands suddenly heavy, almost foreign to me. They had just done something extraordinary, and yet I couldn't stop staring at them like they were evidence. Evidence of what I had just done, or what I had just risked. You should go wash up, one of the nurses whispered to me gently. I nodded, unable to speak, and walked out of the trauma room. The hallway felt colder than before, quieter, almost watchful. I pushed open the door to the staff restroom and stood there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked pale under the fluorescent lights. My hair was slightly disheveled, a few strands clinging to my forehead. There was a faint smudge of blood on my sleeve. I turned on the faucet. The water ran over my hands, washing away the traces of what had just happened. But it didn't wash away the weight. I leaned against the sink, closing my eyes briefly. What had I done? I knew the answer. I had saved a life. But I had also broken the rules. And in a place like St. Matthew's, rules weren't just guidelines. They were protection. For the hospital, for the doctors, for the system, not for people like me. I dried my hands slowly, my mind racing through everything that could happen next. Would they suspend me? Fire me? Report me? My stomach tightened at the thought. I needed this job. Ethan was only 6 years old back then. My husband Robert was working long hours trying to keep up with bills, but we were barely getting by. This job, it wasn't just a career. It was survival. I walked back into the hallway trying to steady my breathing. Everything looked the same, but I knew it wasn't. The receptionist avoided my eyes. 2 nurses were whispering quietly near the supply room. And when I passed them, their voices dropped even lower. They knew. Of course they knew. Word travels fast in a place like that, especially when someone crosses a line they weren't supposed to cross. I went back to the nurse's station and sat down, pretending to focus on paperwork. My hands, still steady back then, moved automatically writing checking charts, organizing files, but my mind wasn't there. It was still in that room, still with that boy, still replaying every decision I had made. Had I done everything right? Had I missed anything? The questions came one after another, relentless. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, the surgery doors opened. Dr. Harris stepped out, pulling off his gloves as he walked toward me. I stood up immediately. "Well?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed. "He's stable," he said. Relief flooded through me so quickly I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. "Thank God," I whispered. Dr. Harris studied me carefully. "You took a big risk tonight, Keith." I nodded. "I know. You could have made things worse." "I know," I repeated. He crossed his arms. "But you didn't." That silence again. Heavy. Loaded. "I did what I thought was right," I said quietly. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced down the hallway as if making sure no one else was listening. Then he leaned in slightly. "Listen to me," he said, his voice lower now. "What you did, technically, you're not allowed to do that, not without a physician present." "I understand." But he added, "If you hadn't acted, he wouldn't have made it to surgery." I swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" I asked. That was the question that mattered. That was the moment everything would shift. Dr. Harris hesitated. And that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "It's not entirely up to me," he said finally. A cold weight settled in my chest. "Who then?" He straightened, adjusting his coat. "Administration," he replied, "and whoever that boy belongs to." Whoever that boy belongs to. The words echoed in my mind. "Do you know who he is?" I asked. Dr. Harris shook his head. "No records, no ID, nothing. But those men, they're gone," he interrupted. "No one saw them leave. Gone. Just like that. As if they had never been there at all." Something about that made my skin prickle. People don't just disappear like that. Not unless they have a reason. And not unless they have the power to do it. "What if no one claims him?" I asked. Dr. Harris gave me a long look. "Someone will," he said. The certainty in his voice didn't comfort me. It made things worse, because it meant he knew something I didn't, or at least suspected it. "Get some rest," he added. "You've done enough for tonight." Enough. I wasn't sure if that was reassurance or a warning. I nodded slowly and sat back down, though resting was the last thing I could do. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. Patients came and went. Charts were filled. Voices rose and fell around me. But I felt detached from all of it, like I was waiting for something, waiting for the moment when everything would catch up to me. It didn't happen that night, or the next. But 3 days later, it did. I was called into the administrative office just after my shift ended. That alone was enough to make my heart race. No one gets called in unless something is wrong. The office was small, but intimidating, with dark wood furniture and a large desk that seemed to create distance between the person sitting behind it and everyone else. Behind that desk sat Mr. Caldwell, the hospital administrator. He didn't smile when I walked in. "Ms. Morrison," he said, gesturing for me to sit. I did, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. He shuffled through a stack of papers in front of him, deliberately slow, like he wanted me to feel every second of it. "We've reviewed the incident from 3 nights ago," he began. "Incident, not rescue, not emergency, incident." "I understand," I said, quietly. He looked up at me. "We've reviewed the incident from 3 nights ago," he began. "Incident, not rescue, not emergency, incident." "I understand," I said, quietly. He looked up at me. His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't kind either. "You acted outside your scope of practice," he continued. "You performed procedures that are reserved for licensed physicians." "Yes, sir." And yet, he added, pausing for emphasis, "the patient survived." I held my breath. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Do you know who that boy is?" I shook my head. "No." A faint smile appeared on his lips. Not warm, not friendly, just knowing. "That's interesting," he said. My stomach dropped, because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't just about rules. This wasn't just about my actions. This was about something bigger, something hidden, something I had unknowingly stepped into. And whatever it was about to change my life in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I remember walking out of that office feeling like the ground beneath me wasn't steady anymore. Not physically. My legs worked just fine back then. But something deeper had shifted. Something I couldn't name yet. But I could feel it. Mr. Caldwell hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened me directly. But there was something in the way he looked at me, like I had unknowingly stepped into something far bigger than a hospital rule violation. "Go home for now," he had said, sliding a document across the desk. "Administrative leave. Temporary. Pending review." The words were printed neatly, almost politely, but they carried the weight of a sentence. I signed it. What choice did I have? The drive home that morning felt longer than usual. The sky was pale, the kind of gray that never quite turns into sunlight. Chicago mornings always had that heaviness to them, but that day, it felt personal. When I walked into our small house, Robert was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He looked up the moment I stepped inside. "You're home early," he said. There was concern in his voice. He always noticed things like that. I tried to smile. Shift got complicated. He stood up immediately, walking over to me. What happened? I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to tell him, but because saying it out loud would make it real. There was a patient, I said slowly. A boy. He was brought in without a doctor present. Robert frowned, and I had to act. I continued. There wasn't time to wait. His eyes searched mine. You did what you had to do. I broke protocol. I said quietly, So, what you saved him, didn't you? I nodded. He's alive. Robert let out a breath, relief washing over his face. Then you did the right thing. I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to. But something about the way Mr. Caldwell had spoken, the way the men had disappeared, the lack of any records. It didn't feel over. Keith Roberts said, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. You've always trusted your instincts. That's what makes you good at what you do. I looked at him, holding on to those words. For a moment, they steadied me. But only for a moment, because 3 days later, the real consequences arrived. Not in the form of a meeting, not in the form of a warning, but in something far colder. A letter. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address. That alone should have been enough to make me uneasy. But it was what was inside that made my hands, steady back then, feel suddenly weak. I sat at the kitchen table, opening it carefully. One sheet of paper. Typed. No signature. No name. Just a message. You will not speak about what happened that night. My breath caught. You will not ask questions. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The boy you treated is under the protection of people far beyond your understanding. I stared at the words, my heart pounding louder with each line. Consider this your only warning. The paper slipped slightly in my fingers. For the first time since that night, I felt fear. Real fear. Not of losing my job, not of being reprimanded, but of something unknown, something powerful. Something that could reach into my life without even showing its face. Robert found me sitting there, frozen, the letter still in my hands. What is it? He asked. I didn't answer right away. I just handed it to him. He read it once. Then again. His jaw tightened. This is a joke, he said at first, but there was no humor in his voice. I don't think it is, I replied. He looked up at me. Keith, people don't just send things like this unless they're trying to scare you. This is a joke, he said at first, but there was no humor in his voice. I don't think it is, I replied. He looked up at me. Keith, people don't just send things like this unless they're trying to scare you. It's working, I said quietly. We sat there in silence for a long moment. What are you going to do? He finally asked. That was the question, wasn't it? What do you do when the truth itself becomes dangerous? I don't know, I admitted. But deep down, I did. I was going to stay quiet, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Because I had a family. Because I had Ethan. Because whatever this was, it was bigger than me. The hospital called the next day. Another meeting. This time shorter, colder, more final. Mr. Caldwell didn't waste time. After careful consideration, he said, we've decided to reassign you. Reassign. Such a harmless word. Such a devastating reality. No more emergency room shifts, he continued. You'll be moved to a lower responsibility position. Administrative support. I felt my chest tighten. That's a demotion, I said, my voice barely steady. It's a necessary adjustment, he corrected smoothly. Because I saved a life. His expression didn't change. Because you violated protocol. I wanted to argue. I wanted to fight. I wanted to shout that if I hadn't acted, that boy would be dead. But I didn't, because the letter was still fresh in my mind, because I understood now. This wasn't just about hospital rules. This was about control, about silence, about making sure that what happened that night stayed buried. I understand, I said instead. The words tasted bitter, but I said them anyway. Because sometimes survival means knowing when to speak, and when not to. My new position was quiet, invisible. I handled paperwork, scheduled appointments, filed records. No patients, no emergencies, no life or death decisions. Just routine. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that things would settle, that eventually I'd find my way back. But weeks turned into months, and months into years. And slowly, that night faded into something distant, something almost unreal, like a story that belonged to someone else. No one ever asked about it again. No one mentioned the boy. No one questioned the missing records. It was as if it had never happened. And eventually, I stopped talking about it too, even to Robert, even to myself. Life moved on. Ethan grew older. I left the hospital years later, taking a quieter job, then eventually retiring. My hands, once steady, capable, trusted, became just hands again. Ordinary, forgettable. Until time did what it always does. It took strength. It took control. And eventually, it took certainty. The trembling started long after that night, long after I had convinced myself that the past no longer mattered, that what I had done had been erased. But standing there in that clinic, hearing Ethan's voice, "Your hands are useless," and then hearing another voice, "Those hands saved my life." Everything came rushing back. Every moment, every choice, every risk. And suddenly, the past wasn't buried anymore. It was standing right in front of me, alive, looking at me, remembering me, even when I had almost forgotten myself. The clinic felt too quiet after that moment, too still. Like the air itself had frozen between Ethan's words and the stranger's voice. I could still hear it echoing in my mind. "Your hands are useless." And then just seconds later, "Those hands saved my life." Two truths colliding in the same space. Two completely different versions of who I was, and I didn't know which one hurt more. The broken glass had already been cleaned up by one of the nurses, but I could still see it in my mind, the way it shattered, the way everyone had turned to look. The way Ethan had looked at me, embarrassed, annoyed, almost ashamed. "I'm sorry," I whispered again, though no one had asked for it. It was a habit now, apologizing for things I couldn't control, apologizing for existing in a body that no longer obeyed me. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "It's fine," he muttered, but his tone said the opposite. "Let's just get this over with." Get this over with. Like I was an inconvenience. Like this appointment was just another task on his long list of things he had to deal with. I lowered my gaze, staring at my hands. They were still trembling. More now. Not just from the Parkinsons, but from something deeper. Shame. The doctor. Dr. Michael Reynolds hadn't moved. He was still standing there watching me, not with pity, not with irritation, but with something else. Recognition. And it made my heart race. Because I didn't recognize him. Not yet. "Ma'am," he said, gently stepping closer. "Can I take a look at your hands?" Ethan let out a quiet sigh. "She has Parkinson's," he said quickly, like he needed to explain it away. "Early stage. We're here to confirm treatment options." I flinched slightly at the word we. We. As if this was something we were facing together. But lately, it hadn't felt that way. Dr. Reynolds nodded, but his eyes never left mine. I understand, he said, but I'd still like to take a closer look. I hesitated, not because I didn't want help, but because I wasn't used to being asked anymore. People usually just took over, corrected, adjusted, fixed things without asking. But he waited, and something about that made me slowly extend my hands toward him. They shook more visibly now exposed under the bright overhead lights. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. Instead, he gently held my right hand in his. His grip was steady, warm, careful, like he understood something fragile was being entrusted to him. He turned my hand, slightly examining it closely. Then his brow furrowed, not in confusion, in memory. Do you have a small scar here? He asked softly, tracing near my wrist. I blinked. A scar. I hadn't thought about it in years. But yes, there was one. A thin, faded line I had gotten during a late shift long before everything changed. I think so, I said, my voice uncertain. He looked up at me then, really looked at me. And in his eyes, something shifted, something certain. Did you ever work in Chicago? He asked. The question hit me like a sudden gust of wind. Chicago? I hadn't heard that city spoken in connection to me in years. Yes, I said slowly. A long time ago. Ethan shifted beside me, clearly impatient. What does that have to do with anything? He asked. But Dr. Reynolds didn't answer him. His focus remained entirely on me. St. Matthew's Community Hospital, he continued. My breath caught. That name, that place, a place I had buried deep inside myself. Yes, I whispered. His grip on my hand tightened slightly, not painfully, but with emotion. What year? He asked. 30, maybe 31 years ago. I said, my voice barely steady now. For a moment, no one spoke. The room seemed to shrink around us, and then he let out a quiet breath, almost like relief. I knew it, he said. Ethan frowned, knew what Dr. Reynolds slowly released my hand, but his eyes never left mine. You were there, he said. That night. My heart started pounding, loud, fast. That night, I repeated, and suddenly, the rain, the hallway, the boy, it all came rushing back. I began, but my voice faltered, because I did remember. I just didn't understand. Dr. Reynolds stepped back slightly, running a hand over his face, like he was trying to steady himself. You probably don't remember me, he said. And he was right. I didn't, not yet. But something inside me was beginning to shift. Something long buried, starting to surface. I've been looking for you, he said quietly. The words hung in the air. Looking for me. Why? For what? Ethan let out a short laugh, though it wasn't amused. Okay, I think there's been some kind of mix-up, he said. My mom hasn't even lived in Chicago for decades. Dr. Reynolds turned to him then, and for the first time, there was something sharp in his expression. This isn't a mix-up, he said. Ethan's smile faded. She doesn't even remember you, he shot back. That's not her fault, Dr. Reynolds replied calmly. Then he looked back at me. But I remember her. Something in his voice made my chest tighten. Not just certainty. Gratitude. Something deep. Something real. I remember the way your hands didn't shake, he continued softly. The way you didn't hesitate, even when everyone else did. My vision blurred slightly, because I remembered that too. The steadiness, the certainty, the version of myself that felt capable. You stayed with me, he said, when no one else would. The room felt too small now, too full of something I couldn't yet fully grasp. I treated a lot of patients, I said almost defensively. But even as I spoke, I knew this wasn't just any patient. This was him, the boy, he said. And just like that, everything clicked. The rain, the missing records, the men who disappeared, the warning letter. My hands began to tremble even more, but not from illness this time. From realization, from disbelief. You, I whispered. Dr. Michael Reynolds nodded slowly. Yes, he said. I was that boy. For a moment, no one spoke. Not me, not Ethan, not even the nurses moving quietly in the background. The world seemed to narrow down to just the three of us, me, my son, and the man who had just rewritten everything I thought I knew about my own life. You were that boy, I repeated, my voice barely audible. Dr. Michael Reynolds nodded again, slower this time. Yes, he said softly. You saved me. The words hit me harder the second time. Saved me. I had spent decades believing that night had been erased, buried under silence and fear and consequences. And now, standing here, someone was telling me that it hadn't been erased at all. It had lived on, in him. Ethan let out a disbelieving scoff. This doesn't make any sense, he said, shaking his head. You're telling me my mother performed some kind of emergency procedure and just, saved your life without anyone knowing? His tone was sharp, defensive. But underneath it, I heard something else. Confusion. Maybe even discomfort. Because this didn't fit the version of me he had built in his mind. The weak version. The one with trembling hands. The one who needed help with everything. Dr. Reynolds turned toward him, calm but firm. Not without anyone knowing, he said. Just without anyone talking about it. Ethan crossed his arms. Right, he muttered, because that sounds totally normal. I wanted to say something, to explain, but I didn't even know where to begin, because I didn't understand it myself. Not fully. I never knew what happened after that night. I said slowly, my eyes returning to Dr. Reynolds. They never told me. His expression softened. I know, he said. That simple acknowledgement made my chest tighten. You disappeared, I continued. No records, no follow-up, nothing. I didn't disappear, he replied quietly. I was taken. The word hung in the air. Taken. Ethan frowned. Taken where Dr. Reynolds hesitated for a brief second, as if weighing how much to reveal. Then he looked back at me. My father came for me, he said. Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. Not relief, not comfort, something darker. Your father? I asked. He nodded. He's a very powerful man, he continued. At the time, I didn't understand just how powerful. A chill crept up my spine, because suddenly, the letter I had received all those years ago didn't feel so distant anymore. The men who brought me in that night, he said they worked for him. My breath caught. So the accident? It wasn't supposed to happen, he interrupted gently. But it did. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Okay, I'm sorry, he said, raising a hand. But this is getting a little dramatic. Are we really doing this right now? His voice was laced with irritation again, the kind that comes from not being in control of a situation. But for once, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize, because something inside me was changing. Something long buried was starting to rise again. Ethan, I said quietly. He looked at me, surprised by the tone in my voice. Just listen. It wasn't a command. But it wasn't a plea either. It was something in between. And for the first time in a long while, He did. Dr. Reynolds continued. When my father found out what happened, he didn't want any records of it, he said. No hospital report, no police involvement, nothing that could be traced back to him or to me. When my father found out what happened, he didn't want any records of it, he said. No hospital report, no police involvement, nothing that could be traced back to him or to me. That's why everything disappeared, I murmured. He nodded. Yes, and the letter. I whispered more to myself than anyone else. He tilted his head slightly. What letter? I hesitated. For decades, I had kept that letter to myself, a secret I carried quietly even from my own husband. But now, it didn't feel like mine to carry alone anymore. I was warned, I said finally, told not to speak about that night, not to ask questions. Dr. Reynolds' expression darkened. I'm sorry, he said. I shook my head slowly. I thought it was over, I admitted. I thought whatever happened, it stayed in the past. He looked at me with something close to sadness. For me, he said, it never did. The weight of that settled between us. You remembered me? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. He smiled faintly. Not right away, he said. I was young. I was unconscious most of the time. But something stayed with me, he continued. Fragments. A voice, hands that didn't shake even when everything else was falling apart. My throat tightened. I used to have steady hands, I whispered. I know, he said, and now I trailed off, glancing down at them again. They were trembling more than ever, visible, uncontrollable. Ethan shifted beside me, his expression harder to read now, less dismissive, more uncertain. Dr. Reynolds stepped closer again. Do you know why I became a doctor? He asked. I shook my head. Because of you, he said simply. The words hit me like a wave. I blinked rapidly, trying to process them. No, I said instinctively. That's not. It is, he insisted gently. I didn't remember your name. I didn't know where to find you. But I remembered what you did. His voice grew steadier. Someone broke the rules to save my life, he continued. Someone chose me over protocol, over fear, over consequences. My chest ached, and I spent years wondering who that person was, he said. What kind of strength it takes to make that kind of decision. Ethan let out a quiet breath. I could feel him listening now, really listening. So I became the kind of doctor who would do the same. Dr. Reynolds finished. Silence followed, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This one felt full, heavy with meaning, heavy with truth. I didn't know what to say, because how do you respond to something like that? How do you respond when someone tells you that a moment you almost forgot shaped their entire life? I didn't think it mattered, I said, finally, my voice trembling. After everything that happened, I thought it was just erased. Dr. Reynolds shook his head. Not to me, he said. Ethan shifted again, running a hand over his face. He looked different now. Less certain, less sure of himself. Mom, he started, but stopped. The word felt strange coming from him in that moment, like it carried weight again, like it meant something more than it had just minutes ago. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't see disappointment in his eyes. I saw something else, something fragile, Something forming. Maybe doubt. Maybe regret. Maybe the beginning of understanding. And suddenly, the room didn't feel so small anymore. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was that boy. The words didn't just echo in the room. They echoed inside me, over and over again, like something trying to break through years of silence I had built around that night. I stared at Dr. Michael Reynolds, really stared at him now. Not as a stranger, not as a doctor, but as a memory. And slowly pieces began to align. Not clearly, not perfectly, but enough. There was something in his eyes, something familiar. A faint shadow of the fear I had seen in that small boy lying on the hospital bed fighting to stay alive. "You were unconscious," I said softly, almost to myself. "You barely opened your eyes." "I know," he replied, "but I remember more than you think." Ethan shifted beside me again, clearly struggling to keep up. "Okay," he said, rubbing his temples. "Let's just slow down for a second. You're telling me you remember her from when you were, what, 6? 7, 8, Dr. Reynolds corrected calmly. Ethan let out a breath. 8. Fine. And somehow, after all these years, you just happened to recognize her from her hands? It sounded ridiculous when he said it like that. Even I might have doubted it once. But the way Dr. Reynolds looked at me, there was no doubt in him. "I didn't recognize her immediately," he said. "Not until I saw the way she held her hand just now. The angle, the slight pressure in her fingers. It triggered something." "I didn't recognize her immediately," he said. "Not until I saw the way she held her hand just now. The angle, the slight pressure in her fingers. It triggered something." "A memory?" Ethan asked skeptically. "A feeling," he replied. And then the details followed. I swallowed hard, because I knew exactly what he meant. There are moments in life that don't leave you. Not really. They settle somewhere deep inside you. And sometimes, all it takes is one small detail to bring them back. "You stayed with me," he continued, his voice softer now, "even when things got worse." My breath hitched. Because that part I remembered. "I wasn't supposed to," I said, quietly. "No," he agreed. "You weren't." Ethan looked between us, his frustration slowly giving way to something else, something less certain. "What do you mean, stayed with you?" he asked. I hesitated, because saying it out loud meant reopening something I had spent years trying to forget. But I couldn't stop now. Not anymore. "There was a moment," I said slowly, "when his condition got worse. After I controlled the bleeding, his breathing became unstable." Dr. Reynolds nodded. "I remember not being able to breathe," he said. "Like I was drowning, but I couldn't move. My chest tightened." "That's when I almost stopped," I admitted. Ethan blinked. "You almost stopped." "I wasn't supposed to go any further," I explained. I had already crossed the line. What came next, that was completely outside my role. Dr. Reynolds watched me carefully. "But you didn't stop," he said. I shook my head. "No, because I couldn't. Because in that moment, he wasn't just a patient. He was a child, alone, terrified, dying." "I held your hand," I said, my voice trembling now. "And I told you to stay with me." Dr. Reynolds' eyes glistened slightly. "You said I wasn't alone," he whispered. My heart skipped. I hadn't remembered the exact words, but hearing them now, it felt like stepping back into that moment. "I didn't want you to feel like you were," I said. Ethan looked at me then. Really looked at me. Not with impatience, not with irritation, but with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Attention. Like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I kept talking to you, I continued, even when I wasn't sure you could hear me. I could, Dr. Reynolds said softly. That broke something inside me, because all these years I thought those words had disappeared into nothing. I remember your voice more than anything, he added. Not the pain, not the fear, just your voice telling me to keep fighting. Tears blurred my vision. I blinked them away quickly, but it didn't help much. I didn't know if you'd make it, I admitted. You didn't promise I would, he said. I looked at him surprised. No, he continued. You just told me not to give up. That sounded like me, more than any promise ever could. Ethan let out a quiet breath. I didn't know any of this, he said. His voice had changed, softer now, uncertain. I turned to him. There's a lot you don't know, I said gently. Not as an accusation, just truth. He looked down for a moment, then back at me. I guess there is, he admitted. Dr. Reynolds stepped back slightly, giving us space. But he didn't leave, because he understood. This wasn't just about him. This was about something breaking open between me and my son. Something that had been closed for far too long. I didn't talk about it, I said quietly. After that night, I wasn't allowed to. Ethan frowned. What do you mean, not allowed? I glanced at Dr. Reynolds. He gave a small nod. So I told him. Not everything. Not the full weight of it, but enough. The records disappeared, I said. I was warned to stay quiet. I was reassigned at the hospital. Everything just vanished. Ethan's expression dark, just vanished. Ethan's expression dark, Ned. That's not normal, he said. No, I replied. It's not. Dr. Reynolds crossed his arms lightly. My father made sure of it, he said. Ethan looked at him sharply. You keep mentioning your father, he said. Who is he, Ned? That's not normal, he said. No, I replied. It's not. Dr. Reynolds crossed his arms lightly. My father made sure of it, he said. Ethan looked at him sharply. You keep mentioning your father, he said. Who is he? There was a pause, a longer one this time, because this question, it mattered, and the answer would change things even more. Dr. Reynolds exhaled slowly. His name is Richard Reynolds, he said. The name meant nothing to me. But Ethan? Ethan froze. Reynolds as in Reynolds Group? He asked. Dr. Reynolds nodded once. Yes. Ethan let out a short, stunned laugh. You're kidding me, he said. I looked at him confused. What? He turned to me. That's one of the largest investment firms in the country, he said. Real estate, healthcare insurance, everything? My stomach tightened, because suddenly, the power behind that letter, the silence, the erased records, it all made sense. I didn't choose that life, Doctor, Reynolds said quietly. But I grew up in it. And you still came looking for her? Ethan asked. There was disbelief in his voice again. But it wasn't mocking this time. It was something else, something closer to respect. Dr. Reynolds looked at me. I owed her my life, he said simply. Silence filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was something else. Something shifting. Something real. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like someone who had mattered. Someone who still did. Ethan didn't say anything for a long time. That alone felt unfamiliar. Normally, he would have filled the silence, correcting, questioning, dismissing. But now he just stood there, staring at Dr. Reynolds, and then at me, like he was trying to piece something together. Like he didn't quite recognize the person standing in front of him anymore. "That's not possible," he said finally, but his voice lacked the certainty it had before. Dr. Reynolds didn't argue. He didn't push. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, worn leather wallet. "I expected this reaction," he said calmly. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Of course you did." Dr. Reynolds ignored the sarcasm. He opened the wallet carefully and slid out a folded piece of paper. Old, yellowed at the edges, handled many times. He hesitated for just a second, then handed it to me. My fingers trembled as I took it, not just from the Parkinsons this time, but from something else. Anticipation, fear, memory. I unfolded it slowly, and the moment I saw what was written on it, my breath caught. It was my handwriting. Messy, hurried, written in blue ink. A note, just a few lines. "Stay with me. You're not alone. Keep breathing. I'm right here." The room blurred, because I remembered writing that. Not as a formal note, not for records, but for him, for that boy. I had scribbled it quickly during a moment when his condition had stabilized just enough for me to step back. I didn't know if he would ever read it. I didn't know if it would matter. But I left it there anyway, just in case. "I kept it," Dr. Reynolds said quietly. My hands shook harder now, the paper fluttering slightly between my fingers. "You kept this," I whispered. "All these years," he replied. Ethan stepped closer, his curiosity overtaking his skepticism. "What is that?" he asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. So I handed it to him. He took it carefully, his eyes scanning the words. And I watched his expression change. Slowly, subtly, but unmistakably. "That's your handwriting," he said, looking up at me. I nodded. "I used to write notes like that for patients," I said softly, "especially the ones who were scared." Ethan looked back at the paper, then at Dr. Reynolds. "You're saying this is from that night?" "Yes," Dr. Reynolds said. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face again. "This is insane," he muttered. But it didn't sound dismissive anymore. It sounded overwhelmed. "There's more," Dr. Reynolds added. Ethan let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Of course there is." Dr. Reynolds reached into his pocket again and pulled out something else this time, a photograph. He handed it to Ethan. Ethan looked at it, his brow furrowing, then his eyes widened slightly. "What is this?" he asked. Dr. Reynolds answered calmly. "That's me, about a week after the surgery." Ethan turned the photo toward me. I leaned closer, and there he was, a young boy lying in a hospital bed, pale, thin, but alive. There was a bandage along his side, and taped to the edge of the bed, the note, my note. I felt my chest tighten, because suddenly, this wasn't just a memory anymore. It was proof. Real. Undeniable. "I don't understand." Ethan said, his voice quieter now. "If all of this is true, why didn't you ever tell me?" The question hit harder than anything else so far. Not because it was unfair, but because it was justified. I looked at him, searching for the right words. "There are things you don't talk about when you're told not to," I said finally. That's not an answer, he replied. It's the truth, I said. Ethan shook his head. So you just kept this to yourself for decades? Yes. Why? There are things you don't talk about when you're told not to, I said finally. That's not an answer, he replied. It's the truth, I said. Ethan shook his head. So you just kept this to yourself for decades, yes. Why? Because I was afraid. Because I was warned. Because I had a family to protect. Because sometimes silence feels safer than the truth. All of those answers were true. But I didn't say them. I thought it didn't matter anymore, I said instead. Dr. Reynolds looked at me, his expression softening again. It mattered, he said. I met his gaze. I know that now. Ethan let out a long breath, pacing a few steps away before turning back to us. This doesn't change anything, he said suddenly. The words felt sharp again, defensive, like he was trying to hold on to something slipping away. She still has Parkinson's, he continued. Her hands still shake. She still... Stop. The word came out of my mouth before I even realized it. Ethan froze. So did I. Because I couldn't remember the last time I had interrupted him. The last time I had told him to stop. But something inside me had shifted, and I couldn't go back. Don't finish that sentence, I said quietly. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. Stronger than it had been in years. Ethan stared at me, surprised, maybe even a little shaken. Mom, I didn't mean I know what you meant, I said. And for once, I wasn't apologizing. I know my hands shake, I continued. I live with that every day. Silence filled the space between us. But don't stand there and act like that's all they've ever been, I added. The words hung in the air, heavy, honest. Ethan swallowed. I wasn't... You were, I said gently. Not angry, not harsh, just clear. Dr. Reynolds remained quiet, watching, because he understood this moment wasn't about him anymore. It was about something breaking open between a mother and her son. I'm not who I used to be, I said softly. But that doesn't mean I was never anything at all. Ethan's eyes dropped. To my hands, still trembling, but no longer invisible. I didn't know, he said. And this time, there was no defensiveness, just truth. I know, I replied, because that was the real tragedy, wasn't it? Not that my hands had changed, but that somewhere along the way, my son had forgotten who they used to belong to, and now, standing here, holding proof in his own hands, he was being forced to remember. The room didn't return to normal after that. It couldn't. Too much had been said. Too much had shifted. Ethan stood there, still holding the photograph, his thumb brushing over the edge of it, like he was trying to convince himself it was real. This changes things, he said finally. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Dr. Reynolds gave a small nod. Yes, he said. It does. But for me, it wasn't just about what it changed now. It was about everything it revealed about the past, about what had been taken, about what had been hidden. And suddenly, I needed answers. Ones I had been too afraid to ask before. I looked at Dr. Reynolds, my heart beating faster again, but not from fear this time, from something else. Determination. What happened after you were taken? I asked. Ethan glanced at me, surprised by the question, because this wasn't the version of me he was used to. The quiet one. The one who let things go. Dr. Reynolds took a slow breath. I was moved to a private facility, he said. Not a hospital. More like a controlled environment. Controlled? I repeated. He nodded. My father didn't trust public systems, he explained. Too many records, too many people asking questions. That's why everything disappeared, I said. Yes. The word landed heavy, because now I understood. It hadn't been an accident. It had been deliberate. What about your recovery? I asked. He looked down briefly, then back at me. It was long, he admitted. Complicated. I had internal injuries that required multiple procedures. My stomach tightened. And you were alone. He hesitated. For the most part, he said. Something about that answer didn't sit right. But, I pressed gently. He exhaled. But I had the note, he said. My chest ached again. That was enough, I asked. It was something real, he replied. Something that didn't feel controlled. Ethan shifted again, clearly trying to process everything. So, your father just erased an entire hospital record? He asked. Dr. Reynolds gave a faint, almost bitter smile. You'd be surprised what money and influence can do, he said. Ethan shook his head. That's not right. No, I said quietly. It's not. Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was reflective, heavy with the weight of truth. I always wondered why I was moved. I continued thinking out loud now. Why no one defended me? Why everything just disappeared? Dr. Reynolds met my gaze. They weren't protecting the hospital, he said. They were protecting your father, Ethan added. Yes. The realization hit me deeper than I expected, because all those years I had blamed myself. Thought I had done something wrong, something unforgivable. But the truth was, I had done something right, and it had been buried anyway. Do you know about the letter? I asked suddenly. Dr. Reynolds frowned slightly. You mentioned it earlier, he said, but I didn't know details. I still have it, I said. Ethan turned to me. You kept it? I nodded. Of course I did. Even when I tried to forget everything else, I never threw that away. It had been a warning, but also a reminder that something had happened, something real. I'd like to see it, Dr. Reynolds said quietly. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because showing it meant fully acknowledging what had been done, what had been taken from me. I can bring it next time, I said finally. There will be a next time, he asked. The question caught me off guard, but the answer came easier than I expected. Yes, I said, because for the first time in years, I didn't want this to end. Not yet. Ethan cleared his throat. So what now? He asked. It was a practical question, the kind he was comfortable with, but this wasn't a practical situation. Not anymore. Dr. Reynolds stepped back slightly, regaining his professional composure. Well, he said, we still have a medical reason for this visit. Ethan blinked. Right. Parkinson's, the reason we had come here in the first place. The thing that had started this entire moment. I almost laughed at the irony, because somehow it felt smaller now, not unimportant, but no longer defining. Let's continue with the examination, Dr. Reynolds said, gently looking at me. I nodded, and for the first time since we had walked into that room, I didn't feel like a patient. I felt like a person. He guided me through a series of simple tests, finger movements, grip strength, coordination. My hands still trembled, still resisted control. But something had changed. Not physically, but emotionally. I wasn't ashamed of them anymore. Not in that moment. because now I knew they had a history, a purpose, a story. Ethan watched quietly from the side. No interruptions. No impatient sighs. Just watching, learning. After a few minutes, Dr. Reynolds stepped back. "We'll discuss treatment options," he said. "There are medications that can help manage the symptoms." I nodded. "Thank you." But the words felt different this time, because they weren't just for the doctor. They were for the boy, the one who had survived, the one who had remembered, the one who had come back into my life when I didn't even know I needed him to. As we prepared to leave, Ethan lingered. He looked at Dr. Reynolds, then at me, then back at Dr. Reynolds again. "I owe you an apology," he said suddenly. Both of us looked at him. "For what Dr. Reynolds asked?" "For not believing you," Ethan replied, "and for what I said earlier." He glanced at me briefly. "My mom's hands aren't useless," he added. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Dr. Reynolds gave a small smile. "No," he said, "they're not." Ethan nodded like he was accepting something he should have understood a long time ago. As we walked out of the clinic, the sunlight hit my face warm and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel diminished. I didn't feel like something had been taken from me, because something had been given back. Not my steady hands, not my old life, but something just as important. The truth. And the recognition that came with it. And as Ethan walked beside me, quieter than usual, I realized something else. This wasn't just about the past being uncovered. It was about something new beginning. Something fragile, but real. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. The drive home was quieter than any we had ever taken together. Ethan didn't turn on the radio, didn't check his phone, didn't rush. He just drove. And I sat beside him, watching the world pass by outside the window. My reflection faintly staring back at me, older, slower, but no longer invisible. For years, our drives had been filled with small talk or tension. Today, there was something else, something fragile, something unspoken. "You really never told anyone?" Ethan asked, finally, his eyes still fixed on the road. "No," I said. "Not even Dad." I hesitated. "Not fully," I admitted. He let out a slow breath. "I don't understand how you carried that alone." I looked down at my hands. They were resting in my lap now, still trembling, but softer somehow. "You learn to carry things when you think you have no choice," I said. Ethan nodded slightly like he was trying to accept that answer. But I could tell he wasn't satisfied. "Not yet. And the letter," he asked. "I told you," I said. "I still have it." He glanced at me briefly. "I want to see it." There was something different in his tone this time. Not curiosity, not skepticism, something closer to responsibility. "Okay," I said. When we pulled into the driveway, neither of us moved right away. The engine turned off, but we stayed there for a moment. Just sitting, just breathing. "I'm sorry," Ethan said suddenly. I turned to him. For what I asked, though, I already knew. "For earlier," he said. "At the clinic." I held his gaze. "You've said worse?" I replied gently. He winced slightly. "Yeah," he admitted. "I have." Silence lingered again. "I didn't know," he repeated. "I know," I said. And this time, there was no distance in the words, just truth. We went inside together. The house felt different. The same walls, the same furniture, but something had shifted, like the space itself was holding a new version of us. "I'll get it," I said, heading toward the hallway. The letter had been in the same place for decades, a small wooden box in the back of my closet. I hadn't opened it in years, but I knew exactly where it was. My hands trembled more as I reached for it. Not just from the Parkinsons, but from the weight of what I was about to revisit. I brought it back to the living room where Ethan was waiting. He stood when he saw the box. "This is it?" he asked. I nodded. Slowly, carefully, I opened it. Inside were only a few things: old photographs, a couple of hospital pins, and the letter, still folded the same way it had been when I first received it. I picked it up, my fingers brushing over the paper. Then I handed it to him. He took it with both hands, almost respectfully, and began to read. I watched his face, because this time there was no disbelief left, only understanding and anger. His jaw tightened as his eyes moved across the page. "They threatened you," he said quietly. "Yes." "For saving a child's life." "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "That's wrong." "I know." He looked up at me. "Why didn't you fight it?" The question was direct, sharp, and fair. I took a breath. "Because I was scared," I said. The honesty surprised even me. I had a family I continued, a job, a life I didn't want to lose. Ethan's expression softened slightly. "I get that," he said. "Do you?" I asked gently. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I think I do now." That word now hung between us, because it meant everything had changed. "What about Dr. Reynolds?" he asked after a moment. "Do you trust him?" I thought about that, about the man in the clinic, the boy in the photograph, the life he had built. "Yes," I said, finally. "Even knowing who his father is?" "Yes." Ethan frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because he's not his father," I replied. That seemed to settle something in him. He folded the letter carefully and handed it back to me. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, because for years, there had been no choice, only silence. But now there was something else. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'm not afraid of it anymore." Ethan studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good," he said. We sat down together, the letter resting between us on the table. For the first time in a long time, we weren't on opposite sides of something. We were just there, together. "I want to meet him again," Ethan said after a while. "Dr. Reynolds?" "Yeah." "Why?" He shrugged slightly. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just feel like there's more to this." He wasn't wrong. There was. Because something about this didn't feel finished. Not yet, not even close. That night after Ethan went to bed, I stayed in the living room. The house was quiet, still, and for the first time in years, I let myself think about that night. Not with fear, not with regret, but with clarity. I had saved a life. That truth had been buried, silenced, taken from me. But it hadn't been erased, and now it had come back. not just to remind me of who I used to be, but to show me I was still that person, even now, even with trembling hands, even with everything that had changed. I reached for the phone. My fingers hesitated over the number Dr. Reynolds had written down for me before we left the clinic. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I dialed. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Dr. Reynolds?" His voice was calm, steady, just like it had been in the clinic. But now, hearing it through the quiet of my living room, it felt more personal. "It's Keith," I said. There was a brief pause. Not hesitation. Recognition. "I'm glad you called," he replied. Something in my chest softened at those words. I wasn't sure if I should, I admitted. "I was hoping you would," he said. I sat down slowly, the phone pressed gently against my ear, my trembling hands resting in my lap. "I've been thinking," I said. "So have I." We both I said. "So have I." We both let out a quiet breath at the same time. It almost made me smile. "I found the letter," I continued. "I had a feeling you kept it," he said. "I kept everything I admitted." There was a silence on the line, not awkward, not heavy. Just out a quiet breath at the same time. It almost made me smile. "I found the letter," I continued. "I had a feeling you kept it," he said. "I kept everything I admitted." There was a silence on the line, not awkward, not heavy, just understanding. "I want to show it to you," I said. "I'd like that," he replied. "But there's something else," I added. My heart began to beat faster again, because this was new. "What is it?" he asked. "I don't think what happened back then is finished," I said carefully. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "No," he said quietly. "It's not." His certainty startled me. "You've thought about this before," I said. "Many times," he admitted. "Why didn't you do anything?" It wasn't an accusation, just a question. One I had asked myself for years. "I was a child when it happened," he said, "and by the time I understood what had been done, it was already buried. But you have power now," I said. "So do you," he replied. That made me blink. "I don't," I said instinctively. "I disagree," he said calmly. I didn't respond, because part of me still believed I didn't. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, was starting to wonder if he might be right. "My father isn't the man he used to be," Dr. Reynolds continued. There was something in his voice now. Not fear, not anger, something closer to distance. "What does that mean?" I asked. "He's older," he said, "less involved in day-to-day operations. But his influence is still there. And the people who helped him back then? Some are still around," he said. "Some aren't." My stomach tightened. "Do you think they would still try to silence this?" I asked. There it was. The fear I hadn't fully let go of, even after all these years. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I do know this. Things are different now." "How?" "There are more eyes," he explained. "More accountability. And I'm not a child anymore. Neither am I." The thought came quietly, but it stayed. "I want to meet again," I said. "In person," he replied. "Yes." "When?" "Soon," I said. "Before I lose my nerve." He let out a soft chuckle. "I don't think you're the kind of person who loses her nerve," he said. I smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised." "No," he said. "I don't think I would." We set a time. The next day, at his office, not the clinic. Something more private, more intentional. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, the room still quiet. But inside me, nothing was quiet anymore. Something had been set in motion, something I couldn't take back. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to life. I was choosing something. The next morning, Ethan noticed immediately. "You're up early," he said, walking into the kitchen. "I have somewhere to be," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "I'm meeting Dr. Reynolds." He paused, then nodded. "Do you want me to come?" The question surprised me, because just days ago he wouldn't have asked. He would have assumed, or dismissed, or avoided it entirely. I considered it, then shook my head gently. "No," I said. "I think this is something I need to do on my own." He studied me for a moment, then nodded again. "Okay," he said, "but call me if you need anything." I smiled slightly. "I will," and I meant it. That alone felt like PR ogress. When I arrived at Dr. Reynolds, then nodded again. "Okay," he said, "but call me if you need anything." I smiled slightly. "I will," and I meant it. That alone felt like progress. When I arrived at Dr. Reynolds' office, it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't cold or sterile. It felt warm, personal. There were books on the shelves, photos on the walls, and for a moment I wondered if one of them might be from that time, from that life. He greeted me at the door himself. No assistance, no distance, just him. "Keith," he said. "Michael," I replied. It felt strange using his first name, but also right. We sat down across from each other, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Because this wasn't just a follow-up appointment. This was something else, something deeper. "I brought it," I said, pulling the letter from my bag. He nodded. "May I?" I handed it to him. His hands didn't tremble, not like mine, but they moved carefully, respectfully, like he understood what it meant. He unfolded the letter slowly and began to read. I watched his face, because this time it wasn't just about remembering. It was about confronting something that had been hidden. When he finished, he exhaled quietly. "They were very clear," he said. "Yes. And very careful." "Yes." He folded the letter again, more deliberately this time. "They underestimated something," he said. "What I asked." He looked at me. "You?" The word landed differently now, not as reassurance, but as truth. "I stayed quiet," I said. "For a long time," he agreed. "But you didn't forget. Neither did you." "We have proof," he continued. "Your letter, my records, my memory, and your father." I asked. He didn't look away. "I'll handle him," he said. There was no hesitation, no fear, just certainty. And for the first time, I believed him. "Then what do we do?" I asked. He leaned forward slightly, and for the first time since this began, there was something in his eyes that matched what I was feeling. Resolve. "We tell the truth," he said. "We tell the truth." The words stayed with me long after I left his office. They sounded simple, clear, almost easy. But nothing about this was easy. Because telling the truth meant pulling something buried back into the light. And once it was there would be no putting it back. I drove home slower than usual, my mind racing ahead of me. Every possibility, every consequence, every fear I thought I had left behind. And yet, underneath all of that, there was something else, something stronger, relief. Because for the first time in decades, I wasn't carrying it alone. When I walked through the front door, Ethan was already waiting. He stood up immediately. "How did it go?" he asked. I set my bag down slowly. "We're going to tell the truth," I said. He blinked. "That's a big step." "Yes." He studied my face. "You're serious?" "I am." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps across the room. "Okay," he said. "Then we need to think about how." That word "we" didn't go unnoticed this time. I repeated softly. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "You're not doing this alone." Something inside me warmed at that, not because I needed him to fix anything, but because he was choosing to stand beside me. "That means records," he continued. "Witnesses. Documentation." "We have some," I said. "The letter. His medical file. Is that enough? I don't know." He stopped pacing and looked at me. "Then we find out." There was determination in his voice now, a different kind than before, less about control, more about protection. For me. "Michael said his father still has influence," I added. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. "Then we assume this won't be easy." "No." Silence fell between us again, but this time, it wasn't uncertain. It was focused. "We should talk to a lawyer," he said. I hesitated. The idea of turning this into something legal, something public, it made my chest tighten. But I knew he was right. "Okay," I said. "I know someone," he added quickly. "A friend from college, Daniel Harper. He handles cases like this." "Cases like this?" I asked. "Corporate cover-ups, medical suppression, that kind of thing." Of course. This wasn't just a story. It was a pattern, a system. And suddenly I realized what happened to me might not have been the only time. The thought sent a chill through me. "Call him," I said. Ethan nodded and picked up his phone. As he stepped into the other room, I sat down, my hands resting quietly in my lap. They were still trembling, still unreliable in ways they hadn't been before. But now I looked at them differently, not as something broken, but as something that had endured. That had mattered. That still did. Later that afternoon, we sat across from Daniel Harper in his office. He was in his 40s, sharp-eyed calm in a way that reminded me a little of Michael. "So let me get this straight," he said, leaning back in his chair. 30 years ago, you performed an unauthorized emergency procedure that saved a child's life. That child was the son of a powerful executive who then erased all records of the event and threatened you into silence. "Yes," I said. "And now that child is an adult," he continued, "and he's willing to testify that it happened." "Yes," Daniel nodded slowly. "That's significant." Ethan leaned forward. "Can we do anything with it?" Daniel tapped his pen lightly against the desk. "Potentially," he said. "But we need more, like what Ethan asked. Documentation that connects the hospital, the removal of records, and the Reynolds Group," he explained. "Anything that shows a deliberate attempt to suppress the truth." I thought about the letter, the reassignment, the sudden silence. I might have something, I said. Both men looked at me. "There were internal memos," I said slowly, "at the hospital. I never saw them directly, but I heard about them." "What kind of memos?" Daniel asked. "Administrative changes? Staff reassignments? Record adjustments?" Daniel's eyes sharpened. "That's exactly the kind of thing we need." "But it was decades ago," Ethan pointed out. "Records don't always disappear completely." Daniel said. Sometimes they're just hidden. Michael's words echoed in my mind. They underestimated something. Maybe this was it. Can you get them? Records don't always disappear completely, Daniel said. Sometimes they're just hidden. Michael's words echoed in my mind. They underestimated something. Maybe this was it. Can you get them? Ethan asked. Daniel smiled slightly. I can try. There was confidence in his voice, but also caution. Understand something, he added. If we go down this path, it won't stay private. I nodded. I understand. Media could get involved, he continued. The Reynolds name carries weight. This could turn into something big. I took a breath. For years, I had avoided attention, avoided conflict, avoided anything that might disrupt the quiet life I had built. But now, that quiet didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like silence. I'm not afraid of that, I said. Ethan glanced at me, and I could see it pride, for the first time in a long time. Good, Daniel said, because if we do this, we do it all the way. All the way. The words settled in, heavy, but right. We're in, Ethan said firmly. I looked at him, then at Daniel, then down at my hands, still trembling, still imperfect, but no longer hidden. No more silence, I said. Daniel nodded. Then let's begin. As we left his office, the world felt different again. Bigger, louder, more uncertain, but also more honest. Because the truth wasn't just something we were remembering anymore. It was something we were about to fight for. And this time, I wasn't going to let it disappear. Everything moved faster after that. Faster than I expected. Faster than I was ready for. Within a week, Daniel had found something. Not everything, but enough. Old administrative archives, he said, spreading several printed documents across his desk. Digitized years later. Most people wouldn't even know where to look. Ethan leaned in beside me, scanning the pages. What am I looking at? He asked. Daniel pointed. These are internal hospital memos, he explained. Dated within days of the incident. My heart began to race. Because this was the past resurfacing, increased administrative oversight staff reassignment record consolidation? Daniel read aloud. Sounds harmless, right? It does, Ethan said. Until you notice the pattern, Daniel replied. He slid one paper closer to me. Look at this line. I leaned in my hands, trembling slightly, not just from the Parkinsons, but from anticipation. Emergency case file number C-1187, removed from active system pending review. My breath caught. That was it. That was him. That's the case, I whispered. Daniel nodded, and here he added, pulling another sheet forward. Nurse reassignment Keith Morrison transferred from emergency care to administrative duties. Ethan went still. They documented it, he said. Yes, Daniel replied. They just didn't expect anyone to connect it decades later. I stared at the papers. Proof. Not just memory. Not just emotion. Something real. Something undeniable. They tried to make it look procedural. Yes, Daniel replied. They just didn't expect anyone to connect it decades later. I stared at the papers. Proof. Not just memory, not just emotion, something real, something undeniable. They tried to make it look procedural. Daniel continued. Routine, but the timing, the coordination, it's too precise. Ethan shook his head slowly. They buried it in plain sight. Exactly. I leaned back slightly overwhelmed, because for so long I thought it had all been erased. But it hadn't. It had been hidden. And now, it was being uncovered. What's the next step? I asked. Daniel looked at me seriously. We bring this forward, he said, carefully. To who? Ethan asked. Media, if necessary. Daniel replied. But first, we give the Reynolds Group a chance to respond. My stomach tightened at the name. Michael said he would handle his father, I said. Daniel nodded. That helps, he said. But we still need to be prepared. Prepared? For what? For resistance. For denial. For power pushing back. Are you ready for that? Ethan asked, turning to me. The question was direct, honest. And for once, I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said, because something had changed. Not just in the situation, but in me. That same afternoon, I met Michael again. This time not as a patient, not as a memory, but as someone standing beside him. Equal. We found records, I told him. His expression sharpened immediately. Really? I nodded and handed him copies Daniel had made. He read them carefully, his jaw tightening slightly as he moved through each page. They kept it, he said quietly. Yes. I nodded and handed him copies Daniel had made. He read them carefully, his jaw tightening slightly as he moved through each page. They kept it, he said quietly. Yes, they just buried it. Yes. He exhaled slowly, setting the papers down. I'm not surprised, he admitted, but I am angry. There it was. Not the calm doctor, not the grateful patient, but the man who had lived with the consequences of that silence. My father will deny this, he said. I know, I replied. He'll say it was administrative protocol, risk management, legal precaution. Will you believe him? I asked. He looked at me. No. The answer came without hesitation. Good, I said, because that mattered, more than anything else. I spoke to him, Michael added. That made me pause. You did? Yes. And his expression darkened slightly. He didn't deny it, he said. That surprised me. What did he say? Michael hesitated. Then, he said it was necessary. The words felt cold, heavy, like something that had justified everything that followed. For who, I asked. For the family? Michael replied. For the company? For the future? I shook my head slowly. And what about you? He said. I survived, Michael said. That's what mattered. My chest tightened, because that was the kind of thinking that erased people like me, that erased the moment, the choice, the risk. That's not enough, I said. No. Michael agreed. It's not. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then he looked at me again. What do you want to do? He asked. The question mattered, because for the first time, this wasn't something being done to me. It was something I could choose. I want the truth to be known, I said. And after that, I thought about it, about the years of silence, the shame, the way I had started to believe I was less. I want my life back, I said softly. Michael nodded. You deserve that. The following days were a blur of preparation. Meetings, documents, conversations, everything building towards something bigger, something public. And through it all. The following days were a blur of preparation. Meetings, documents, conversations, everything building towards something bigger, something public. And through it all, Ethan stayed beside me. Not ahead, not behind, beside. One evening, as we sat together at the kitchen table reviewing notes, He looked at me and said something I hadn't expected. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "What?" "The way I've treated you," he admitted. I didn't interrupt. I didn't soften it. I just listened. "I thought I was helping," he said, "correcting things, taking control when you couldn't." I nodded slightly. "I know, but I wasn't seeing you," he continued. "Not really." That was the truth, and hearing him say it, it hurt, but it also healed something. "I was seeing what you couldn't do," he said. And now I asked. He looked at my hands, still trembling, but no longer dismissed. "Now I see what you did," he said. My throat tightened, because that was everything. Not perfection, not strength, just recognition. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again. The day the truth came out, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing at the edge of something irreversible. Daniel had arranged everything carefully. A formal statement, a controlled release of documents, and one interview. Just one. "Too many voices, and the story gets lost," he had said. So it would be me and Michael, together. The morning of the interview, my hands trembled more than usual. Not from Parkinson's, from nerves, from the weight of what we were about to do. Ethan stood beside me in the kitchen, watching quietly. "You don't have to do this," he said. I looked at him. "Yes," I said, "I do." He nodded slowly. "Then I'm proud of you." The words landed gently, but deeply, because for so long I didn't know if he could ever see me that way again. Michael met us at the studio. No white coat this time, no distance, just a man standing beside me. "Ready." "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I think so." He smiled slightly. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "Just honest." Honest. That was something I could do. The interview room was simple, neutral, but the lights felt bright. Too bright, like they were forcing everything into the open. The interviewer was calm, professional, but direct. "Mrs. Morrison," she began, "why are you coming forward now, after so many years?" I took a breath. "Because this was the moment everything began." I was silent for a long time. I said, my voice trembled slightly, but I didn't stop. "Not because I didn't want to speak," I continued, "but because I was afraid." I glanced at Michael, then back at the interviewer. "I was told that what I did didn't matter," I said, "that it should be forgotten." A pause. "And did you believe that?" "For a while," I admitted, "but not anymore." The interview continued. Piece by piece, I told the story, not dramatically, not exaggerated, just truth. The night, the boy, the choice, the consequences. Michael spoke too, about what he remembered, about what was taken from him, about what was hidden. And then the documents were shown. The memos, the letter, the photograph, proof. Not just emotion, not just memory, but fact. When the interview ended, the room felt quieter than before. Not lighter, just settled. Like something that had been waiting a long time had finally been released. "Thank you," the interviewer said. I nodded. But I didn't say anything, because I didn't feel like I had done something heroic. I felt like I had simply stopped hiding. The response came faster than any of us expected. Within hours, the story spread. News outlets, online articles, discussions, people reacting, some shocked, some angry, some grateful. grateful that the truth had been told. The Reynolds Group issued a statement the next day. Carefully worded, predictable. They acknowledged historical procedural decisions. They denied malicious intent, but they didn't deny the facts. And that was enough. Michael called me that evening. "It's working," he said. "What is the truth?" he replied. I sat quietly, the phone in my hand. For years, I had thought the truth was something fragile, something that could be erased. But now, I saw something different. It could be delayed, buried, ignored, but not destroyed. Thank you. For years, I had thought the truth was something fragile, something that could be erased. But now, I saw something different. It could be delayed, buried, ignored, but not destroyed. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up," he replied. I smiled faintly. "I almost did," I admitted. "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." That night, Ethan came into my room. Not hurried, not distracted, just present. "Mom," he said. I looked up. "Yes." He hesitated for a moment, then walked over and sat beside me. "I've been thinking about something he said." "What?" The way I said your hands were useless. The words hung in the air, heavy, uncomfortable. "I shouldn't have said that," he continued. "No," I said, gently. "You shouldn't have." He nodded. "I didn't understand," he said. "I know." "But I do now," he added. I looked at him, really looked, and this time I didn't see distance. I didn't see frustration. I saw something softer, something real. "These hands," he said, reaching for mine carefully. "They're the reason someone is alive today." Tears filled my eyes. Because hearing it from him, that mattered more than anything else. "They're not useless," he said. "No," I whispered. "They're not." We sat there quietly, his hand holding mine steady, even when mine wasn't. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like something had been lost. I felt like something had been found. Not my old strength, not my old life, but something deeper, myself. And maybe that was always enough. Sometimes life has a way of convincing us that we are no longer who we used to be. Age, illness, loss. These things can slowly chip away at our confidence, our identity, our sense of worth. And when the people closest to us begin to see us differently, it becomes even easier to believe that we've become less. But the truth is, what you have done in this life never disappears. The kindness you showed, the courage you found in moments no one else saw, the choices you made when it mattered most, they live on. Sometimes in ways you may never know. Sometimes in people who carry your impact quietly for years. And sometimes they come back to remind you of who you truly are. Keith Morrison didn't regain steady hands. She didn't return to the life she once had. But she reclaimed something even more powerful, her truth, her dignity, her worth. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. You are not defined by what you can no longer do. You are defined by what you have done and the lives you have touched along the way. So if you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or forgotten, remember this: you matter. More than you think, in ways you may never fully see. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more meaningful stories like this. I'd truly love to hear from you. Where are you watching from and what time is it right now? And tell me, have you ever been underestimated only to later realize your worth never disappeared? Share your story in the comments. You're not alone.